Why would you return? Why would you bring more? Why would you endanger them all? Her voice was a trailing echo of immeasurable sorrow. What danger? Lemora said, and in her voice was a tone of such compassion that the very sound of her words seemed to have an immediate effect on the apparition. There is nothing but danger here for you, the priestess answered. You must leave. This was not a command. It was a desperate, pleading expression of such concern that I immediately wondered if we were indeed in harm's way, more so than we even knew. I can do nothing for you now. He is coming. He will be here soon, and there will be nothing to be done. Leave, fools! Leave now! Who is coming? Ludwig asked, gazing around the chapel, seemingly adjusting the lenses of his goggles, as if to focus images clear. The Cursling! He is starving! He will slay you all! The ghost's overall manner had become one of hysteria, which seemed to add an even colder edge to the bitter wind snapping against our flesh from the windows. Snow drifted over the corners of the room from outside, as the specter seemed to be almost blurring and shaking with emotion. What in the high spirits is a Cursling? Patrick spoke, looking to the faces of the other group members in wonder. Ludwig stared only at Ravnissa, as if he knew for certain that she had an answer. We should leave. These were the first words we'd ever heard spoken by the pale, dark woman, and their gravity was unsettling. There was an urgent certainty that was in complete agreement with the desperate pleas of the ghost. We are in great danger. She was backing away towards the door, and I saw as she produced a very compact black bow from within her cloak. Get out! Get out before he arrives! I cannot stop him. He will not be swayed from his course. There is no man left within him now. He has only hunger and rage. The thing I saw, shouted Patrick with weird excitement. Is that what it's called? It's called a Cursling, and it's real. His relief was unmistakable. Why is it called a Cursling? I said as the entire group seemed to be edging its way towards the exit. If a child is born in certain strange circumstances out of loss, vengeance, and death, it can become a Cursling, a physical embodiment of the dark rage and vengeful lust of its mother. Lemora spoke breathlessly as she gazed around, watching with growing fear for movement in the church. But they are always born in the Stonelands or near the Dark Mountain. How could one be born this far west? Ludwig expounded, anxiously twisting the curled end of his mustache. It's the statue of Athenda, Ravnissa said, as she strung an arrow. It is carved either from a rock from the Dark Mountain or the Stonelands. These words carried over us to the ghost, which seemed suddenly to grow smaller and more translucent as her shaking hands clasped before her. The statue, she whimpered. It was the statue. All this time I wondered. All these years, why? It was carved in the stone, and I would not have believed even if I had been told. I didn't believe in the stories about Stoneland. She was rambling and muttering to herself with her head down between her spectral hands, her image fluttering and fading. Eldon stood at the broken entrance, gesturing frantically. "Come on, let's go now." And as he spoke, I watched a single long rope-like vine slither from the top of the arch like a serpent tasting the breeze. I pointed at the invading tendril at the exact time that Eldon looked up, saw it, and let forth a high-pitched yell that cut through the sound of the wind as he dived forward from the seeking appendage. I watched with fascinated revulsion as more of the long tentacles appeared, one by one, across the doorway, as if the thing was standing upside down on the wall outside, like some huge bug. My mind raced as I fought not to become unhinged. So great was the horror I felt in anticipating the sight of this wretched thing. I suddenly remembered Patrick's description in full, again realizing that I had never really attempted to construct a viable image based on his words, so strange it had seemed. I had not bothered to actually imagine the nightmare he had described. But now, here it was, crawling before me from the darkness of the night. "It is too late!" The ghost, now nothing more than a shining blue-white orb, shouted with utter, hopeless surrender. "You shall join me in death. Gaze upon him now, men of the Watch, and know that you meet your true brother. Just as you were children of the plague, so was he, born of the misery and death of that dark time. He can smell the blame of your fathers upon you, and will seek to taste that guilt on your blood. He cannot kill something which is made of death and disease. You can only lay before it and plead for mercy." As the creature's horrid insectoid face crept under the doorway, it truly seemed as if immediately its attention was drawn by Patrick and I. The bizarre, opaque, mantis-like gaze locked on me as it perched, still and hanging from the ceiling, its body a writhing armored forest of lashing tentacles carried on giant locust legs. A horror like nothing I had ever seen or could possibly have imagined, now creeping upside down along the rafters to the very edge of the open hole, with jutted, rotted, snow-covered planks ringing its edge. So transfixed was I on its monstrous magnificence that I barely noticed a movement at my side, as Lemora, suddenly, in a whirl of gestures and fast-spoken, unintelligible words, vanished from our view. I truly questioned my sanity, but could still see footprints shuffling through the dust and snow to testify to the validity of her invisible state. Fighting desperately for control over my faculties, I forced my violently shaking hands to equip themselves with my pistol and saber. Patrick, although he had anticipated this horror, seemed no less shocked or immobilized as his shaking hands reached for his gun as well. Ravnissa crouched unmoving and cat-like, with an arrow ready to draw, as Ludwig hung his camera box at his side so that he could withdraw a strange device from his shoulder bag. For the most, it resembled a large pistol or short musket, but contained a large metal cylinder around the center, which he deftly checked and rolled. How do we fight this thing?" Patrick whispered over the only sound besides our breathing, which was a low, humming growl, punctuated by a series of clicks which emanated from the horror. "Our goal, right now, is only to escape alive, Ludwig whispered. We most likely cannot defeat this thing here and now, Ravnissa added. Based on what the ghost had said, its attacks will probably focus on you watchmen, came a comment in my ear from the unseen Lemora. Try to stay clear of its grasp, came her warm breath and words again at my side. However, as if this was heard and understood by the Cursling, it launched itself from its perch and spun upright in mid-air, flying a mass of lashing appendages directly at Patrick. He had not even the time to fire a shot before it sprang, but bewildered, I saw as the thing landed upon some unseen barrier which had been placed over him. Still stunned, he had not leapt but was instead thrown by invisible hands to the side. As the creature landed violently, its tremendous weight and forceful landing issued a loud crack from the wooden floor as it reared up before Ravnissa, bathed in the light of the still-present ghostly sphere. Ravnissa drew back and began firing arrow after black, shining-tipped arrow masterfully into the small open areas on its form not covered in thick armor. As suddenly I became aware of a series of percussive blasts being issued from its side, originating from the form of the small white-haired Ludwig, who somehow was managing to fire what seemed like one after another of fiery, smoky gunshots without reloading. Again and again the creature was hit by the cannon-like fire, and indeed part of its legs was shattered as its form spewed dark red human-like blood in fountains from its injuries. A tentacle whipped before me as I realized that even now the creature was staring unblinking and desirous at me, holding me transfixed by its stare, even as Eldon's shouts at my side, yelling frantically for me to move or fight, fell on my mesmerized ears. I felt that indeed this creature had a power over me, which left me frozen in its attack. And if Eldon had not leapt forward and snatched me back, I would have fallen in its grasp. As it had focused on me, Patrick had snapped awake and fired 2 shots, only to once more freeze, paralyzed as it returned its gaze directly to him. Once more, lashing at him, its tendrils were blocked by what had to be some mystic projection of force summoned by the vigilant art of Lemora. Ludwig had finally ended his assault after what had seemed an endless barrage of musket fire, but now had drew forth a heavy, round, metallic object the size of a small cannonball from within the depths of his bag. He held it in one hand while he pulled a match from the band of his enormous top hat and prepared to strike it with his thumbnail. He only stopped for a moment to look up at the group and shout, "Clear out!" Patrick was being dragged toward the door by a now slowly materializing Lemora, while Eldon slapped and screamed, shoving me towards the window. From the corner of my eye, I saw a flash and heard a loud hissing sound as Ravnissa and Ludwig both leapt through the adjacent window. I had just come to my senses enough to leap out myself when I heard the single, unmistakable blast of explosives. Landing outside in the snow, control returned to my movements. I stood and turned just in time to see the billowing cloud of smoke and flame erupt around the creature. The floor, which had already been bending and cracking beneath our combined weight, now collapsed and disintegrated in the force of the bomb blast. I watched in awe as the Cursling fought, writhed, and reached, even as it plummeted down into the depths of the building's basement. For a moment, I thought the entire chapel would collapse, but its rigid stone walls held, even as the creature disappeared into darkness. The spectral, glowing light of the priestess orb shone as I saw the Cursling retreat into some tunnel beneath the floor, her voice clear over the wreckage.
"Flee, my love. Hide, little one. and let them harm you no more tonight.
Then, slowly the light dimmed in the clouds of rising dust, smoke, and snow before she was gone, vanished the same as the horror she revered.
Go, Tilly! We leave now, shouted Eldon. We are done with this.
And with that, we fled into the night. In the 3 days since the night at the chapel, Patrick and myself had fought to remain as normal to our lives and routines as we could possibly manage in the light of what we had experienced. We met for meals, walked our patrols, and in truth spoke very little to one another, so great was the impact of the event. Above all else that had happened that night in Plague Town, the thing which truly haunted both of us was the control the creature had manifested over the two of us. We had been struck dumb and defenseless by whatever power it exerted over us, and as Lamora had explained as we trudged back toward the gate of the barricade, it was due to our very heritage and history. The ghost had not lied, nor exaggerated, in the sense that our fates were indeed intertwined with the creature she described as our brother, born of the plague. It seemed the more we thought of it, the perhaps we were in fact debted to be slain by the monstrosity.
No, 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 Ludwig shouted at us as we crossed back into the city. That is exactly why it has his power over you fools. It controls you because of the guilt of your fathers. That shame both feeds the ghost and gives the Cursling its sway on you. You will never face that creature down if you cannot resolve that great unconscionable guilt.
Will it hunt us? Patrick had said silently, and everyone stood still waiting for Ludwig's proud proclamation, but he was answered by silence, a response I feared worse than Ludwig's endless ranting. It was Lamora who had answered. Possibly, but I think not, she assured, placing a hand on each of our shoulders. If it was such, it would have found you already and attacked Patrick on one of the many other nights of his patrols. These words filled us both with such relief that if she had not said them, we might not have been able to carry on. You must understand that its existence is bound somewhat to the stone which affected its birth. If it trails too far from that statue, it may well return to a human shape.
Yes, which is why it has so far remained on the other side of this wall, Ludwig added, thoughtfully in what appeared to be his attempt at reassurance.
But what about all the murders in the city? Do you think it is responsible? Patrick looked confused, and I knew that he had already undoubtedly placed the Cursling as the perpetrator of the brutal flayings. Honestly, so had I. I do not think that that creature committed those murders, Ludwig spoke as he reached into his coat, searching for something before withdrawing a heavy white meerschaum pipe with the bowl carved into a mastiff's lined face from his coat. No, it is not, Ravnissa agreed, as for the first time her small dark eyes met mine, and I felt a sudden impulse to look away, so deep and cutting was her stare. Those are murders committed by men for their own gain and reasons. It may involve magic, but it is not that Cursling. Looking quickly to Patrick, I could sense that he, like me, was relieved at this, having thought of the seething, vengeful creature rising from every gutter in the city.
Guess we still have an open case, then, Patrick said quietly. However, even this relief would not grant us peace in the following days.
We had sat quietly in the library with Eldon as he studied, but had not spoken before rising to go to work. It was on the third day, when a messenger had arrived with a letter from the Stoneland Society requesting our presence as soon as possible, that some light of hope had flickered for us. We had anxiously departed, and slowed only long enough to fetch Eldon from the gamehouse on the way. Upon arrival, we were escorted in and taken to the same meeting room where now Fischer, Lemora, and Ludwig were seated, along with Annis, Debrius, and 2 other women I did not know. Only Ravnissa was absent, however. I had already speculated that she seemed likely to avoid such circumstances unless coerced by some need. Fischer stood and greeted us with handshakes and introductions to the 2 strangers. The smaller woman, with strange, pale skin, stark white hair, and large eyes, the color of dark amethyst, was called Kastya. She was dressed in unusual dark blue and black robes, which would have been out of place anywhere else in Dark Beach, but suited her mysterious manner without contention. As all of the Stoneland Society, she seemed a foreigner, and in all aspects alien, but at the same powerful and intimidating. The other lady seemed the complete opposite, dressed also in robes, but hers of bright forest green with yellow sun-like interlay, a shawl of the same draped in her shoulders and head. Her eyes were soft brown and green, with pale freckled cheeks and long shining hair like copper. She sat directly next to Fischer, and for some reason gave the impression that this is where she usually was found. The style of her dress seemed so specific to me that I felt I should recognize it, but eluded me. I wondered if perhaps she was a priestess, until my suspicion was confirmed by Fischer, naming her as Sister Lynn Marin. As we seated, I saw that on the table in front of Fischer was a worn and battered ancient book with leather tie straps and the look of a journal. He gestured to it and said, "Ravnissa and Annis ventured back to the chapel during the daylight hours and searched for clues as to the creature's origin. They found this journal hidden in an alcove within what was the priestess's bedchamber. You should study it, gentlemen, especially the pages and passages we marked. It seems the entire tale is told." Lemora stared at the tome, as if still in wonder. "It begins when the priestess first constructed the chapel and had ordered a statue of Athena to be sculpted from a local artist. She comments on the strange stone, but was grateful for the low price she paid for it. Years pass," Debrius added, "and nothing of consequence occurs until the plague came. She gave her every waking moment to caring for those people who came to her chapel." Lemora was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief as her voice wavered slightly. Her hatred for the city was so great. "But never so more than when the young pregnant maid came to her," Ludwig said, this ominously, removing his pipe from his lips for emphasis. "A young woman with child, whose husband had died, came to the priestess." The woman named Lynn spoke, as if she felt a great empathy. "She was a small, dark girl with a strange accent who had come to the city for work and found only the horror of disease. The priestess took her on as her own and cared for her as if she were her daughter. However, despite her prayers, the girl too was fated to grow ill." "The priestess was devastated." Fischer cleared his throat, as if uncomfortable with this emotion. "She begged Athena to spare the girl, but alas, she was already infected. She did, however, manage to give birth before she passed away.
and whether it was fate or Athinda's blessing, the child was healthy and without disease. At least that she knew of, Ludwig stated coldly. Yes, the child was afflicted, Lemora said in a low, sad tone. It was a Cursling, Annis spoke, as if this held great meaning. Could you tell us exactly what that means? I asked, and saw that Eldon had withdrew a notebook from his coat and was taking notes. Annis reached to a box on the table and withdrew a cigar, which she prepared with practiced ease. But by the look of the others, it was she who would answer and explain, as if she were an authority. In the land of stones where I am from, she revealed, there are great, vast rings and altars of stone which are found in valleys and hilltops all over the country. These stones were brought there hundreds of years ago by a mad chieftain in order to appease his new bride, who had come from the Dark Mountain. Legend states that the stones are infected with the dark energy which is said to manifest in the depths of the caves of that place. People are told from birth that the stones are to be avoided at all costs. Children are never to play in these places and are never to be conceived near a circle should a horror occur. A horror like a Cursling, Patrick said, his gaze shifting from face to face, trying like me to understand what sounded impossible. The priestess had not known, but from the moment the girl had come to her church, she had been exposed to a dark mountain stone. All the girl's hatred, loss, and fear was given a form, and that form was imprinted on her child. But she would not know until later. Annis spoke with considerable authority and audible sympathy. Smoke trailed from her mouth with her words. The child would seem normal at first. The priestess took him as a blessing and raised him even as the plague ravaged the city. Ludwig's voice had a strange tone, as if he were seeing some dark humor in the tale. But the boy was barely walking when he changed the first time. She tried to control him, Lemora stated sadly. But even when the wretched thing was small, it had taken to killing. Ludwig indeed seemed to be smiling ironically behind his beard, drawing a derisive look from Debrius. The priestess was torn, Lynn explained, and it seemed she too had taken something deeply personal from this tale. She loved the child, but her faith demanded that she stop it. She could not bring herself to kill it when he was in his human form, and when he changed, he was almost unstoppable, Annis finished. By the time she had resolved herself to end its life, it was too late, and she too had become its victim. And because of this great dishonor and failure to uphold her vows, she was not brought to Athinda's side. Lynn now openly shed tears. But her spirit remained, and continued to watch over the boy. Fisher spoke now as if from within some deep reverie himself. The entire group seemed to have been moved or enamored by the events described in the journal. And now it roams the city? Patrick looked as if he were preparing to begin the hunt this moment. No, Fisher explained confidently. We have removed the statue from the chapel. We believe that should the Cursling be removed from its influence, he will once again become human and remain so. Debrias seemed certain in these words, and I felt that all of them was speaking from experience.
What will he do?
Eldon asked, for the first time looking up from his busy note-taking. There is no way to know what kind of human personality has existed inside the creature. We do not know if the boy was regularly changing and therefore already had some human perspective, or if he had been trapped in a permanent state of deformation. Ludwig still seemed as if perhaps he were in some sense amused or entertained.
He might well be very childlike, Lamora sighed.
We should try and find him. Patrick spoke only to me, but Eldon too nodded in agreement. We have already agreed to search for the boy. Fisher stood from the table and walked over to the window and, pulling the curtain aside, gazed out into the street as if almost expecting to see the Cursling there.
The boy?
Patrick said, confused.
We estimate he is only 16 or 17 years old, Fisher explained. He would be so lost and confused. Lamora stood as if she could not continue and might leave. The ghost will help him if he returns to the chapel. Eldon spoke as if desperately trying to bring hope to the dismal events. And we will watch the chapel, I added. He fled into the sewers. I recognized that Patrick was now speaking more to himself than the group. But we don't know how well he knows the sewers, if he has never held his human shape for long. I spoke directly to Eldon now, who was again scratching notes with his nub pencil into his small black journal. All we can do is hope, and try to help him if we can, Fisher announced as he threw the curtains wide open now, and let the blinding light of the bare white snow and grey sky into the darkness of the room. I gazed around at all the people present, and thought of the difference between my closer friends, Patrick, and yes, even Eldon, and compared us to the members of the Stoneland Metaphysical Society, wondering if we were coming closer to this group. I wondered if we were being accepted amongst them, or simply being preyed upon or manipulated by these eccentric, skilled, and powerful strangers. Still, I wondered if they were involved in the ongoing murders of the city crime syndicates, and if they were, then what was their reasoning? Why were they here, and what was their motives? I was forced to admit to myself that I felt towards them much the same as I had felt towards Eldon, which was suspicious, and yet influenced by a feeling of respect and fascination. They seemed to be strange but decent people to me. I had dealt with criminals for years and knew that there was no marker for a person inclined to darkness or violence. Even those who had committed themselves to greed and treachery could often easily pass as kind and good-intentioned. Only time and careful observance would betray the constructed masks of most people. People seemed under the impression that evil had a look and a way about it. We all are inclined to think we have some ability to detect lies and see truth, and indeed, some are much better judges than others. However, seeing souls is a rare gift indeed, and reading minds almost unheard of. I have come to the conclusion that all people are capable of great harm and evil to ourselves and others, and I believe that the stains of this taint are often very well hidden. I can only watch and study those I encounter with a degree of doubt and yet hope that they are more inclined to kindness than harm. So in saying this, I look upon the Stoneland Metaphysical Society with a certain distrust. But as I grow closer to them, I also have a certain strong intuition that they mean well. Or at least, I hope they do.